Welcome to the CFO Track podcast. I'm your host, Tom Hunter, and every week I'll be bringing you stories from some of Australia's best and brightest CFOs and the lessons they learnt along the way. My goal for the podcast is to provide learning and development opportunities for those wanting to get to the level of the guests on this show, but they just didn't have the access to those lessons otherwise. Let's get into it. On the show this week, I'm joined by Jorrick Chivers. Jorrick's the CFO of Stadiums Tasmania. That's the organisation behind the stadium for the upcoming AFL team in Tassie. Jorrick was also one of the first employees behind the Tassie JackJumpers NBL team and was a key part behind their growth and success. As a sports lover, it was awesome hearing about the business and operations side of it, especially as they're growing it from scratch. I hope you enjoy it, so here we go. Jorrick Chivers, welcome to the CFO Track podcast. How are you?
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, really good, and appreciate you having me on, mate.
Absolutely. How's the week been?
Yeah, been busy. We're in the reporting cycle, so there's a lot of meetings, a lot of committee meetings, so lots of papers and lots of outcomes coming out of it. So it's been good. Been a good week.
Yeah, no, never stops.
Exactly. You go from one cycle to the next and one issue to the next, so it's good fun.
Nice. Well, I've given the listeners already a bit of an understanding of you and your background, but I can never do it justice. So it'd be good to hear from yourself a bit of an overview of where you're at the minute.
Yeah, perfect. So I'm with Stadiums Tasmania as their CFO at the moment. So Stadiums Tasmania runs all the major sporting infrastructure in Tassie. So we've got a couple of venues in the north. We're soon to acquire a couple of venues in the south. And obviously, probably the jewel of the crown will be the Mac Point Stadium when that comes online. So very excited to have that project approved by government, and then looking forward to getting started on that and getting our teeth into that project.
Hopefully we can get a bit of an inside scoop on it later on.
We'll see.
Nice. So the whole idea for the show is to give up-and-coming finance professionals exposure and get that mentorship they might not be getting otherwise. It'd be good to get an understanding of why you got into accounting, why finance, where did it all start?
Yeah. So obviously, like most accountants, had a passion for numbers and was obviously comfortable in that space and enjoyed being in there. And also, growing up, family had a business, so I was always connected with business. So to put those sort of two passions together. Did an accounting degree and ended up in one of the big four and worked my way through there. So just the passion around numbers and just working in Tassie. So I started off with Deloitte, which was amazing. Got a good grounding there and worked my way through that. But just really enjoyed providing solutions for small business particularly, which is where I started, and just helping people out who probably aren't as financial literate as we are to sort of understand what was going on within their businesses.
How long were you at Deloitte for?
It didn't last long at Deloitte. I think it was about 18 months at Deloitte and then moved to a second-tier firm. So down here it was called WHK Dennison, which was cool. So I finished my training with them and then did like most people do. I took off and had a little bit of a working holiday in London.
Nice. Where did you land in London?
Ended up in Crouch End, so in northeast. So it's really nice part of town. It's sort of just a tiny
leafy, right?
Well, leafy. Yeah, it's good. It's got a couple of nice big parks and it's just away from the tube station, so it was a nice part of town. Absolutely loved my time in town, and obviously talking to young professionals. I think as an accountant, it was when I went sort of 08, 09, it was a great time to be over there. It was pre-GFC or just before the GFC happened, and it was awesome. It was awesome. Lots of work, lots of Aussies, and just lots of a great experience to be over there at that time of my career.
Yeah, nice. Why did you do Crouch End? Because you didn't do the typical Clapham or Shepherd's Bush?
Well, it's a creature of circumstance. So my uncle was married to an English lady, and her sister lived in London. She lived in Crouch End, so we ended up staying with them for a couple of weeks while you get the rental, and you just sort of where you start is sort of almost where you stay sometimes when you go there. We just felt comfortable there, and my wife had a job up in that area of town, so I was just like we both sort of worked. I worked in the city, she worked in the north, so it just made sense to stay there. But I loved it. We loved our time, as I said, and looking forward to getting back there soon, hopefully.
Did you you work in a Queen's something?
Yes. So I did a bit of investment banking, which wasn't my cup of tea. That's certain styles for courses, the horses for courses there, but ended up with a place called Her Majesty's Court Service. So my role, I was a finance manager there, and I was responsible for all the courthouses around England and Wales. So that was a pretty cool job. So it was really good fun. We obviously made sure all the bills were paid, but as part of that, you got a perk here or there where you go and visit a nice old building and have a bit of a look around, so you could do a bit of sightseeing on the company card, so to speak. So it was good fun.
How was the culture shock going from Tassie to London at the time?
Yeah, it was big. Obviously, Tasmania, and especially back then, was quite small and really quite insular. But we were ready for that, and ready for that sort of big city living, and we're prepared for it. It was huge. So obviously London, I know yourself, Tom, you've been there as well. It's a big city, and there's a lot going on. But as a sort of mid to late 20-year-old, it's a great time of life, pre-kids as well, to be over there and really enjoy what the city has to offer before life gets too busy and there's too many commitments in the way.
Yeah, nice. What professionally though? What did you take from that time? Because what was it, 2 years?
So my goal when I went over was I was really keen, rather than just sort of spending my 2 years working in one place, I wanted to sort of chop around and try a few different things. So it was almost like a little mini career break just to see exactly where I wanted to end up. I'd done the sort of Big Four public practice pathway and sort of realised that partner probably wasn't something that I was aspiring towards, or something that really drove me. So I went over there, and that's obviously said. I worked in a couple of different investment banks and enjoyed it. Great people, but just knew that wasn't going to be for me. And then got in local government or government organisation, and actually quite enjoyed that. Quite enjoyed the challenge of working in a big organisation like that, but also just the role it had and the people it had. So sort of steered me back towards a probably more, rather than a real niche accounting, numbers specific reporting role, more a generalist role in accounting, where you get more breadth in the role. And whilst finance is always at the centre of what we do, where you can actually make an impact in different parts of the business through process improvement and analytical thinking and stuff like that. So really enjoyed that side of that role.
Yeah, nice. And how was it coming home?
It's always a shock coming home. So especially you take the leap where you quit a secure job and you go overseas, and then you sort of bounce around having a good time, and you come back and the real world sort of sets in that you've got to find a job, especially coming back to a market like Tasmania and Hobart specifically. It was always going to be a bit of a challenge for me to find work. My wife's a teacher, so she could just come back and pretty much jump in wherever she wanted. It wasn't as much of a challenge, but yeah, I was lucky. For those who have been in Tasmania and know a lot about Tasmania, it's very much a networks-driven island, and being the local helps, but obviously knowing the right people at the right time helps. So lucky enough to fall into a role through a guy I worked with prior to leaving. He'd heard I was back and hit me up and got me a job. So it wasn't as bad as I thought. I was prepared not to work for probably about 5 or 6 months, and I got a job within 6 weeks. So it was probably too soon.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, exactly. So I was looking forward to a bit of time off, but I got back into work a bit quicker than I expected.
So do you think that that's the pretty critical part to job seeking in the smaller markets?
Definitely in Tasmania. I think it's a different way of operating down here. As I said, people who live down here understand what it's like down here, but it's it's very small, so the opportunities are limited. So you need to make sure that when you do get the chance, one, you obviously sell yourself like you do in any interview in any market, but two, you've just got to make sure you've got the connections and keep your networks open. It's too small a place to burn bridges or to sort of have people offside. So you're just going to make sure that you're connected and where you can lean on someone. So like you'll find in Tasmania, if you don't know someone, you know someone who knows that person. So it's a matter of using those connections and those networks when it's time to use it to your advantage.
Yeah, nice. Where did you land first job back?
So I landed in a power company down here called it was called Tas Networks, and it was a power distribution business. So in their management accounting team, so it was cool. I really enjoyed it. They just had a demerger of the state power industry. So it used to be one player, and they just uncoupled and become three. So it was a period of quite a lot of change for them, and obviously lots of opportunities in there to grow with the organisation, and obviously just a great group of people to work with. As I said, I knew one of the guys in the team, and there was just a good group of people, so I had a good time. Yeah,
nice. And then how did the McKillop College job come up?
Yeah, so that one, my brother was actually he's a CFO as well, but he was actually a bursar at a school as well, a business manager at one of the other colleges, and he really enjoyed his role. And I guess with the role with the power company, whilst really enjoyable, it was very much a management accounting role, so reporting and that sort of thing. And I was ready to spread my wings and take on a bit of a challenge and try something a bit bigger and something a bit broader than just finance. So schools are a great place for that. Like obviously you've got the academic stream, which is led by the principal, and then basically everything else sat within that role. And it was a small school that was expanding too. So it was a school down here that only went from grade 7 to 10, and then they were getting an 11 and 12 campus as well. So it was a great time. Okay. It was quite a point of critical growth. A lot of capital development. So I got to cut my teeth on some major capital projects at that school, which was really cool, a great learning experience for me, and obviously brought in the skills. You sort of take on a lot of that risk function, you take on the HR function, you take on the IT function. So really, really enjoyed that part of it, the variety it provided me.
What does a business manager at a school actually do?
Yeah, so as I said, you oversee a lot of all those functions. So
Yeah.
your days are quite varied. It's dealing with parents around school fees, which isn't a great
Yeah,
part of the role.
right.
But so you've got a compassionate arm, and I was in a faith based school as well. So it was obviously a Catholic school, so you had to be mindful of that and support that ethos. And then it's around making sure that obviously the schools are run by academics and their teachers, and they're great
Mm,
people, but they probably aren't people who have come from a business background. So you've really got to support the
sure.
principal and your
Yeah.
board in understanding what the key drivers are to one, make sure you stay solvent, but two, just make sure that you're getting enough bang for your buck and really directing your funds and your resources to the areas that it's going to, ultimately get the biggest impact for your young people at the school to grow and get the best out of it.
So leading up to that, most of your roles were very financially focused, and that
Yeah,
was the first one that was a bit more operational. What did
correct.
that do for you in terms of understanding business operations and how an organisation works?
Yeah, huge learning curve and a huge opportunity for me too. Like I come into an industry where um, a lot of my peers were probably in their late 40s, if not 50s, and I come in there as a 30-year-old, quite young. So quite a different change in terms of the dynamic, and they're like massively collegial. And I would never have been able to do the job without their support because it was very much sharing and helping you out. But I just loved it. I loved the challenge. It was a lot of hard work. It was a huge growth learning curve for me. It was one of those ones where you go to work every day and you've got the butterflies in your stomach because you're like, oh my god, am I going to be able to do this? Am I in the right space? Am I bitten off more than I can chew? But the the feeling of satisfaction and fulfillment at the end of each day was amazing because you're really challenging yourself every day to bring yourself up to speed and to be an expert in sort of areas that you'd never worked in. And it was, yeah, just really enjoyed that. And by the time I got through the first cycle, it was really cool because you sort of felt like you understood what you were supposed to do.
Yeah.
And then you got to expand on that. And the next sort of 4 years was really about growing it and setting the school up for the next steps in its journey.
Yeah, no. Is a business manager the most senior finance person in the school?
Correct. Yeah. So you basically, everyone reports up to you. So it's almost like a CFO slash COO role. So it's sort of
Yeah.
a hybrid of both. So you basically, as I said, there's an academic arm that runs all the curricular and
Mm,
learning stuff, but
sure,
everything
sure.
else. So all the maintenance guys, the canteen, the uniform shop, all the volunteers, all the work health and safety requirements, all the risk, all the insurance, all the payroll, all the HR issues, all come filtering through to you. So you're the last point of call. You normally have you'll have a risk manager, you'll have a finance manager, you'll have
Right.
different
Right.
roles in there to support those functions. But you're
Yeah.
basically leading and overseeing those and setting strategy as part of the senior executive team as well. So it's
Yeah.
quite diverse and quite fun. I really did enjoy it.
Given that then was your first quasi CFO style role, then
Yeah.
like, what were the challenges that came through that you didn't anticipate when it happened?
I guess the biggest part for me was going from a team where you've got a lot, like obviously working with a team of accountants, and then you
Yeah,
are
yeah,
the
yeah.
accountant. So the challenge for me was that you're the point of truth now all of a sudden, and whilst you are very confident in what you're doing and you understand what you're delivering, having that sense check or that sounding board was a bit of a challenge to start with. I was fortunate and lucky, as I said, my brother was in a similar role, so I could always pick the phone up and talk to him. But it was all about surrounding
Okay.
myself with people who could provide me with advice and help. It's like getting that mentor. So like probably prior to that role, your mentors and your support networks potentially were inside the organization you're working in. Whereas once you get to that point, your networks and your support systems are probably outside the organization. So a real big thing for me, and this is hard, accountants normally are introverted and don't like to get out and about and get out amongst the group, but like it was really important to keep those networks going and take the time. It might be when you're really busy, you might think, oh, I don't have time for this, but sometimes it's going for that coffee for half an hour with a colleague to talk
Yeah,
through a
cool.
few issues or to help them with a few issues they may have as well can add so much more value than punching out a spreadsheet that needs to be done, because that work will always be there. It never disappears, but the network and the soft side of the roles is really important to keep on top of.
Yeah, it's a great point. And so, because you were there for just almost 8 years, right? So it
Correct?
must have been a
Yeah.
pretty changing experience for you. Well, what prompted the move on?
To be honest, I was loving the role, absolutely loved it.
Yeah,
And then an opportunity, obviously, that on the other side, outside of work, I was a very passionate basketballer, as you can see from the jersey behind me. I played a lot of sports, played a bit of NBL one, or it was called
yeah,
single back in the day when I was there. But I was never a good basketballer, but just an average
sure.
basketball. But just enjoyed it and loved
Yeah,
being
yeah,
around the sport. My father is a coach and has been a coach forever, so like I'd always been around it. And then when the JackJumpers got announced in Tasmania, I was pretty keen to be involved. But at the same time, I was extremely happy with where I was. We had a big project launching, so I wasn't actively looking to move. But again, fortunate enough to have a few connections in the organisation with the new CEO that was coming in, another gentleman that was working in the NBL. I had a pretty close connection to as well. So managed to obviously apply for the sort of COO / GM of basketball role and got that, which was really exciting. And yeah, it would have taken a big role to get me out of there, and it was a huge role, like a dream role for me to get that JackJumpers job.
So how did that lead up? Because you must have been employee one or close to employee one.
Yeah. So we had Simon, who was the CEO, was appointed, and then Christine, who was appointed roughly at the same time as me, who was the next one in the queue. But they were both Melbourne based. Obviously, it was right in the middle of COVID, so it was a difficult time. And I guess that for me it was a bit of a risk of jumping out of a school into a startup sporting franchise, which is in a sport. Basketball is going gangbusters now, but historically it's been one of those sports that was peaks and troughs and quite a risk. But the opportunity was too good. So yeah, I'm still extremely proud. I was the first Tasmanian employee for the organisation and the first employee with boots on the island, so to speak. So it was a pretty cool time.
So what is day one of setting up a sport organisation look like? Where do you start?
I guess you have these glamorous ideas of what a startup are like, and then you actually get into a startup and you're like, oh my goodness, what have I done? Day one was you sort of think, okay, well we don't have computers because no one's got them yet. That's my job to go and find an IT provider and buy computers, and you don't have pens, you don't have paper. So day one is sitting at the desk in my house, just sort of thinking, okay, I've got to start reaching out to suppliers and contractors. We've got to find an office. We've got to find everything else under the sun. So there was, I think it took us 4 weeks to find an office space to actually move into. So there were a lot of meetings around my
Were you able to move in offices then? It started to open up a little bit, I guess?
Well, Tassie, for those who weren't in Tassie was a little bubble within a bubble. So once you're in the island and you've done your quarantine.
They played finals down there, didn't they?
Yeah, we were living normally. So there were no restrictions at all. And the NBL season, the one before we started, so we were an organisation and started, was delayed a little bit. But when we started in our time, it was still like you quarantine for 2 weeks and you come in. But once you're in Tasmania, you moved around like nothing was going on because there's no COVID. So that was fine. So it didn't impact us that way. But yeah, once we got an office and got our feet under a desk, so to speak, things started to move very, very quickly, as you can imagine. Trying to set up a whole sporting franchise from a high performance to an office to getting players in market, getting a coach in 9 months was quite a churn.
So were you much finance at all then, or was it all
not really? So it was basketball and finance. So I was the key finance person. So I would still report to the board and report to Larry Kesselman in terms of what our numbers were. But there was plenty of financial support around me. So he had an outsourced team in Melbourne that I worked closely with, who basically did a lot of the processing. So they did like AP and payroll and stuff was sitting in that function. It was more just directing and getting your head around. The reporting on those sides of things was the main finance part of it, and then the rest of it was very similar to McKillop in terms of just running the business as a business. So setting up all the process and procedure, the policies, the functions, and then on the flip side of that, you've got the GM of basketball and the recruiting of players. So it was quite a big role. So it was a massive role, and it consumed a lot of the time.
So you got involved in player lists and rosters and stuff like that?
100%. So especially once we got up and running. So I'd work like with Scott, the head coach, and we'd map out what free agency looked like. We'd go to Las Vegas and we'd do the summer league thing, and we'd recruit players over there and do all that sort of thing. And obviously, my function in that, whilst I've got a basketball background, I said to Scott, my role is not to identify talent, so to speak. It's more to challenge thinking and make sure that what they're telling me their holes in the team are match up with what they're actually presenting to me to recruit. And then obviously more importantly is making sure they spend what they're allowed to spend, because as you can imagine in those sports, it's the temptation when you've got a soft salary cap is to go that little bit more, Can we spend a little bit more? And you can always justify spending a bit more, but at times it's just saying, no, pump the brakes. We've probably stretched ourselves too far. It's time to walk away from this deal and look for someone else.
Yeah, sports teams are always really funny because like the main priority in most commercial businesses is revenue and profit, right? But more often than sports team, it's are we winning games? Are we getting people in the door? How was that transition for you?
Yeah, it was really good. Like obviously, I think Larry as an owner is fantastic. Like, say, here's a big, day one, it's like, sport is a business. He said, like, where clubs get themselves into trouble is that they forget that it's a business. As you said, you can get so easily carried away with the wins and the losses and all the stuff that comes there. But you got to remember that basically it's a business. So you've got to set your budget, you've got to set your boundaries, and you've just got to live by them. And then, obviously the major focus for them is we're very lucky. We had a product that hit the market at the right time in a sweet spot. So I'm not sure if you know about the Jackies too much, but obviously we had sold out arenas from day one. They still do now. I was at the game. They had a game last night. It was amazing. So like it's a sellout crowd. It's the hottest ticket in town at the moment. And then so that side of the business sort of took care of itself. But the commercial side, which was managed by Christine, was unbelievable. She did a great job in terms of driving the revenue, driving the growth. And then it was up to me as the operation side of the business is to activate that for our partners. And I guess that's a shift in mindset is when you're working in a sport, it's how are you creating value for your partners? And on the flip side, as a GM of the basketball as well, is like how are we creating the less barriers for our staff? I say staff, but it's players, so to speak, so that they can perform at their absolute best every single day. So that was my major focus: is how can we take as many distractions away from our players, so all they have to worry about is training and performing, and then from our sponsors, how can we give them an experience that is world class? And I guess that's something we tried to do in that organisation. Is whilst we're small and Tasmania's small, it doesn't mean that the experience can't match, if not be better than mainland rivals or mainland venues.
Well, I think that eventuated with the scale of how quickly things blew up, right? And then on court, when did you win? Was it 20?
It was season 3. So my first year, we started off extremely poor and snuck into the playoffs. Then we made it all the way to the grand final and lost that year. The second year I was there, I was only there for 2 seasons. We made it the semis, and then the last year after I left, I recruited the team. So I'm still claiming it. Lesson, so I'll claim it.
Absolutely.
Recruited the team. They went on and won the championship that year. So to win the championship in 3 years is unheard of. And for us in a sporting environment, there's many different ways to measure success. But how I measure success is there's no point winning a championship and then going broke financially in 2 years' time, or having a great commercial pipeline and everything's going well, but you've got no on-court performance. So I think, we ticked the boxes. We had 5 metrics behind the scene that we wanted to sort of strive in, and we ticked the box in all 5 of those, which was unbelievable to do in 3 years.
Yeah, awesome. And how did the co-CEO role come up?
Yeah, so Simon, who was the original CEO, so he decided after season 2 it was probably time for him to go back to Melbourne and try a few different things. So we're always in the position where we're hoping to sell the club. Was Larry's aim. It was close. So Simon was gone. I think originally they thought it was going to sell a bit quicker than it did. So myself and Christine were co-CEOs for about 7 or 8 months, I think it was. And then obviously transitioned to Christine being CEO.
How did you split it?
I guess because before Simon left, we had real 2 distinct functions of the business. So we're pretty collaborative anyway. So we obviously, as the 3 of us, and even as the 2 of us, we bounce a lot of things off each other. So we wouldn't work in isolation. But obviously the commercial, public relations, stakeholder management, comm side of it sort of sat with Christine still, and then the operational side of things and the finance continued to sit with me. So it actually worked really well. I enjoyed working with Christine. She was a good leader and did a phenomenal job since I left as well. Took it on to bigger and better things.
Would you recommend that model for other business models?
I guess it depends on what you like. So all leaders are going to have gaps, aren't they? Like there's no leader that's got the perfect suite. So I think it worked really well for us in that you'd have to have 2 leaders that are complementary. I guess if you had 2 leaders that didn't complement the skill set or have a relationship that would allow it to happen, because I guess you have to have a lot of you've got to let go of all ego and those sorts of things in that sort of situation. So and we did that pretty well, I thought. So I enjoyed it. It'd have to. I've seen it in other businesses. Like there are other businesses that do that, but I think it depends on the business. It depends on the leader as well.
Yeah, right. And so, at what point did you realise it was time to move on?
I had a young family, so it was quite a big toll on my everything outside of work. And it's one of those things too. When you work in something that you're extremely passionate about, it doesn't feel like work, but it comes at a cost in other parts of your life. So when it got to the point where Larry's like, Christine's going to be the CEO, I just sort of thought, it's probably just a natural point for me to leave the business. I thought it'd be hard to stay behind for her if I was still there. And also too, it was just like, I just think it's probably a sign that it was time for me to move on. And at the same time, this role presented itself that I'm doing at Stadiums Tasmania. So it just sort of, I don't know, I'm not superstitious or anything like that, but it just seemed like it all aligned, that it was just meant to be, that it was time to jump in and try something different.
Yeah, nice one. So what was the process like of that role coming up? Was it just a tap on the shoulder? Is it relationships?
No. So it was a formal. So I saw the role, and obviously James, my current CEO, like I didn't know him prior to that. I had met him once in passing when I was still at the JackJumpers, so knew of him but didn't know him very well, and just the job came up, so I just went through the formal recruitment process and was lucky enough to fall into the seat, so to speak.
So how early on was the discussions around Mac Point happening around then?
So that they were already well underway. So I guess the AFL team had been announced at the, like provisionally, subject to a stadium being built, and the stadium was all go ahead. I don't know if you're overly familiar with the stadium debate. It's been on and off and on and off and on and off, but at that stage it was on. So it was one of those leap of faith opportunities. You know, you're an organisation you love. You're reasonably secure and reasonably comfortable, but then at the same time, the draw of working in a project like this, and for me, without being arrogant, you know, you've probably built one of the most, being part of a contributor towards building one of the best successful, sporting startup franchises in Australian history. Yeah. To then move across and build, which is a landmark in Tasmania. If you haven't heard, I'm a passionate Tasmanian. I love what the state's doing, and then moving across and building probably one of the most significant pieces of community infrastructure that this island will see for a long time was the allure of that was something I just couldn't say no to.
What's it been like building it or building that function in the public eye? Because it's very, very public.
Really,
I imagine it's full on too.
Yeah, it is. And it's quite a convoluted way it's going about it too, in terms of there's obviously us as Stadiums Tasmania, who will be the eventual owner-operator, and then there's the Mac Point Development Corporation, who are the builders of it at the moment. So we're obviously in all the conversations with the client and directing and obviously providing advice, but it ultimately sits with Mac Point Development Corp to build it. But it's been really interesting. So my involvement in terms of the nuts and bolts and the design stuff is obviously not massive, but just behind the scenes, it's been a huge learning experience for me, and such an exciting thing to be involved in the venue space and what this is going to do. One for me personally in terms of my career opportunity, but two, just for the state of Tasmania. I think it's going to be a game changer for what we can deliver and the sort of events and sports that we can bring down to this state.
Because it's not government, it's government aligned, right? Like
we're a state authority, so we sort of sit outside government, but we're sort of half in, half out, if that makes sense. We've got the minister as our key stakeholder, and then we obviously, but we work completely separate as a commercial private entity. So we have our own sort of we're developing our own EBA and those sorts of things. So we're not employed by the state, but we do ultimately have to report up through the minister.
Yeah, sure. And so what does that mean from an accounting perspective, from a finance perspective? What does that change for you day to day versus
a lot more. That was a big adjustment for me, coming from private enterprise, and especially working with an owner like Larry, who was very nimble and very happy to make decisions and just get on with things. Like moving back to quite a regulated, structured environment. So Tasmania has treasuries and instructions, so we're bound by some of those, not all of those. And obviously, just having going from an advisory board to back to a normal board is obviously your spots and checks along the way are quite a lot more rigorous and quite a lot more oversight, which it needs to be too, because we're public funds and public resources. So, but it was definitely a adjustment going back from, hey Larry, is it okay to spend this money to you're running a formal process and going through tender processes and stuff. So just making sure we got the rigor around that has been a bit of a challenge, but also it's been really good. Now we feel like we're in a good spot. We've got all that in place.
Yeah. So outside of the Mac Point stuff, what else? What one of the projects?
So we've just taken on in the last 12 months. We've taken on two venues in the north: the Launceston Silverdome and New Tas Stadium. Obviously one's a big football venue, which they currently have 4 Hawthorn games there, and obviously we'll play Tassie Devils games there in the near future. And then the Silverdome is the home of the JackJumpers in the north, and is about to get the new WNBL franchise playing games out there as well, the Tasmania Jewels. So been very exciting, but very fortunate. So in the last sort of couple of months, had the biggest concert that Tasmania's ever had in the Foo Fighters playing at UTAS. That was a big game changer. I think for us, when we come across James, myself, and our COO David, obviously we come across this organisation to try to make a stamp and try to make a difference, and to be able to attract the biggest concert that Tasmania's ever had in our first sort of 12 months
Yeah,
of
awesome.
operating venue was a massive coup for us, and we're pretty proud of how we delivered it and
Yeah.
the impact it's had on the north of the state.
So how do you go about winning events like that when you're
Yeah,
competing against
it's
other large
complicated.
markets?
Yeah, it's yeah, it is. It is. You're sort of working against other markets. It's a little bit of luck involved too. There's a little bit of how nimble you can be in terms of financing it and providing the right type of funding
Yeah.
for it. But also too for us, it's about being open to working with these promoters and with different organisations to make their experience as easy as possible. I think the knock on Tassie from an events delivery point of view has always been the difficulty to get to Tasmania and to bring the production down here. And obviously we're able to work closely with the promoters to sort of break down some of those barriers, whether it's working closely with TT Line to make that process smooth for them, or whether it's just assisting with local contacts to make sure that they can obviously deliver as much through Tassie providers is something that's important. It's just helping them, and hopefully that's our point of difference. Tasmanians like to be known for their hospitality and willingness to help others and get things going, and that's what we're trying to model down here as well. And hopefully this
Yep.
first show can be one that leads to more down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. All your roles as a finance professional have been super operational. And a lot of the time, people in finance want to get as operational as possible and get out into the business. So for those people that are struggling to do that or struggling to be out in the business, how would you recommend they go about it?
Yeah, I guess it is hard too, because when you're in finance, you get and that's my biggest bugbear of finance. I still have those conversations myself. Is that I'm not a scorekeeper, and like the traditional finance function is scorekeeping and compliance, and it is super important, and it's something that definitely needs to happen. But as I always say to my board and to my CEO, is like, if that's the role you want in this function, that's not me, because I don't add value there, and that's not my sweet spot. But I guess it's about showing how finance adds value to the business as opposed to how it scores. And I guess that's for me, is like, how can my mindset and how can the way I think differently to others add value to the rest of the organisation. I think that's how you get yourself involved, is that if you can show them that you're open to it and open to learning, but also can actually add value to some of those conversations, that's how they get around it. And also too, for me, working in a startup, which is why I'm sort of drawn to this environment, this is my second one in a row, is like, the organisations are quite lean and quite green. So, when things happen, it's all hands on deck. So it does give you an opportunity to get out of the desk and get on the floor and actually get your hands dirty and get involved in stuff, because that's where I feel like, for me, I make the biggest impact, and where I like to be. I feel like that's like all of us. We want to be on the front line and working with the rest of them and sort of adding value that way, as opposed to sitting behind a desk and just sort of compiling numbers.
Yeah, and if they are stuck in the weeds, and just is it a time management thing, or is it prioritising? How do you get out of the weeds to be more operational?
All depends what the organisation wants as well, I guess. So it might have been a bit of luck on my half, but as I said, it's about finding ways to get yourself involved. One, obviously you're not going to go from 0 to 100 straight away, but it's just taking opportunities, being persistent, and asking for opportunities to grow in those space. So, like, for me, it's a constant conversation with James and Dave around, how can I add value to this, and making sure that when the opportunities come up for me to add value, that it doesn't let my other work suffer as well, so that I can still deliver on that, but also be in that side of the business. So I think that's it. And also, it's just a matter of having that, not everyone has it, but I'm not being arrogant saying that I do, but just having that openness to be adaptable and flexible and taking on whatever task gets thrown your way. Like, I'm very happy to do the dog's body work as much as I am to do the high level fun stuff as well. So it's just being open to take on all tasks that you can, because that's the only way you're going to get exposure to all parts of the business.
Yeah, nice. And outside the big stadium deal, where do you see things going for the organisation over the next 12, 18, 24 months?
Yeah, so the finalisation of design and procurement of the Mac Point project is going to be massive for us. So the next 12 months, we're obviously in market, or they are in market to get a lead contractor for the construction phase. So that's going to be, appoint that person, finalise design, and then we can actually start getting it out of the ground. And for us, that's probably the rest of this year. But then as 27 rolls around, it's really going to be about, okay, we're full on workforce planning. Like, how do we need to resource this thing? How do we need to, be ready to go, so that when the stadium's open and we're playing, we're not behind the eight ball. And then on the flip side, for the other venues we have, it's we've taken over 2 distinct venues run separately. How do we merge?
Yep.
How do we merge that in and actually harmonise our workforce to make sure that we've got, where the 3 of us as executives are quite clear on what sort of culture and what sort of values we want to deliver in our organisation. We've been very good at being able to do that while we're small. So how do we keep that while the organisation grows? And how are we conscious about making sure that we have a connected workforce that's geographically dispersed, but also, working through the cultures and values that we're really proud of and want to make sure this organisation keeps.
Yeah, no. And then from an industry perspective, doesn't necessarily have to be for the organisation, but accounting, finance in general, where do you see things going over the next couple of years?
Yeah, it's obviously an interesting space. So, from our perspective, even from a recruitment perspective, it's obviously the entry-level roles are quite challenging to find just in terms of quality of candidates. But being in Tasmania, that mid-tier is even more difficult to find as well. We're finding this sort of experienced staff, especially in a market like Tasmania, tend to move to the mainland because obviously financially it's better for them and career-wise there's more opportunity. So for us, it's how do we attract, and this is in finance but also across some of the other functions in the business too, is how do we attract quality staff, especially in an industry that's had no footprint in Tasmania for a long time. So it's like that's a real challenge and something we're working through. And some of the things we're thinking about is obviously typical things like reward and recognition, but obviously you can only remunerate so much. So it's like, well, what's going to make us different to be an employer of choice so that we can attract people back? But for me, I'm extremely passionate about giving young people an opportunity to have a go and to flourish in this space. So I was very fortunate. I always wanted to work in sports and entertainment and thought my pathway would be to the mainland at some point. And luckily enough, I got to manage to stay in Tasmania and do it at home. So I'm excited about bringing other people who are in the same situation, Tasmanians or people who are willing to come down to Tasmania and make it home, and provide them with the opportunity to really shine and cut their teeth in an industry that's a lot of fun, but it's also hard work.
Yeah, nice. Well, you've been great, Jorrick. I've really enjoyed hearing the story behind sport and the high growth phase of the Jumpers. It's been great. Yeah, if someone has any questions and wants to reach out and just get more detail from yourself, is that something you're open to?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not a massive LinkedIn user, but I always respond to messages and stuff like that. So as I said, I'm by no means an expert in everything, but I'm always happy to help out anyone who's on their path and on their journey. And whether that's a quick phone call to have a chat or catch up for a coffee if they're in Tasmania, always open to promoting my pathways and sharing my journey. Not that it's the perfect journey, but it's what I know. And, if it adds value to someone else, I'm always happy to share. Absolutely.
Well, I'll chuck all the links in the notes when it does go out. But thanks again for coming on the show.
Appreciate it, Tom. It's been great. Thanks for having me.
Speak soon.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks for listening to the CFO Track. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with a friend. I'll see you next time.